whisper from the family dinner table. "Hello, it's us again," in the quiet of the night, where even the greatest discords seem to shrink. Have you ever sat at a family dinner and felt an invisible tension? A silence heavier than the sound of chewing. Two cousins not speaking a word to each other over a 5-year-old debt that both of them remember incorrectly. An aunt and another aunt glaring at each other over a platter of boiled chicken because of a careless joke at someone's wedding a decade ago. These tiny cold wars, played out at the dinner table, for reasons an outsider could never understand. It's not just about money or word, it's about feeling slighted, about who the favorite child is, about stories retold in 1,000 different versions, where everyone is the victim in their own version of the story. Now, imagine a family feud that doesn't last for 5 years, but for millennia, not over debt, but over a promise from God, not over a careless joke, but over the question, who is the true heir to the greatest spiritual legacy? Tonight, we will flip through the album of a very special family, a family whose arguments have shaped the history of the world. But first, let's tune into the same frequency. Please press subscribe to lock in our frequency for next time. Click the little bell, like a gentle ping, signaling that you are ready to listen. And most importantly, leave a comment and let me know, in your family, is there a legend or an argument that gets told and retold through the generations? Thank you. Now, let's turn to the first pages of this album. You'll be surprised to find that, before they were enemies, they were brothers. The family album, the first pages are identical. When we look at a modern world map, with borders drawn in blood and politics, it's hard to imagine that Judaism and Islam share a common starting point. We are used to seeing them as opposing forces, two irreconcilable ideologies, but that is a mistake, a dangerous mistake. To understand this story, we must put aside the images from the evening news. We must peel back the political layers of the 20th and 21st centuries to touch the spiritual core within. And when we touch that core, we find an astonishing truth. Judaism and Islam are not two trees growing in different forests. They are two large branches, growing from the same ancient trunk, and that trunk is named Abraham, the common father, Abraham. This is the first, most important page in this family album, a picture of a man, standing in the vast desert, looking up at a starry sky and placing his entire faith in an invisible God. For both Jews and Muslims, Abraham, or Ibrahim in Arabic, is the patriarch of the faith. He was the first to establish a direct covenant with the one God, abandoning the polytheism of his tribe to follow the call of a monotheistic faith. He is the model of absolute obedience and devotion. The most famous story about him, a foundational narrative told in both the Jewish Torah and the Muslim Quran, is the ultimate test of faith. God asks Abraham to sacrifice his own beloved son. In the Hebrew Bible, that son is Isaac. In Islamic tradition, it is Ishmael, but that detail, at this moment, is less important than the act itself. Abraham, though heartbroken, obeys. He places his son on the altar, and at the last moment, as he raises the knife, an angel stops him. God was only testing his loyalty. This act shaped the essence of both religions, a relationship based on complete submission to the will of God. The word Islam in Arabic means submission, and the history of the Jewish people is also a series of tests of their loyalty to their covenant. They share a father who taught them the first and most important lesson of faith. The two brothers, Isaac and Ishmael, and from that common father, two branches begin to grow. The story of Abraham's two sons is the starting point of this fateful divergence. Abraham's first wife, Sarah, was barren, so, She allowed Abraham to have a child with her handmaiden, Hagar. Hagar gave birth to Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn son. In the Quran, Ishmael is revered as a prophet and considered the patriarch of the Arab tribes. The Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam, is believed to be his direct descendant. Years later, a miracle occurred. Sarah, despite her old age, gave birth to a son, named Isaac. In the Hebrew Bible, Isaac is the son of the promise, the one who would inherit God's covenant with Abraham. His lineage, through his son Jacob, formed the 12 tribes of Israel, also known as the Jewish people. This is the first family tragedy. 2 half-brothers, both are sons of Abraham, both are blessed by God, but the story of their inheritance is told in 2 different ways, creating 2 separate spiritual lineages. One branch reaches toward Mecca, the other toward Jerusalem, but they are still rooted in the same trunk of Abraham. The shared prophets. Flipping through the album, if you continue to turn the next pages of this family album, you will see many familiar photographs, faces cherished and revered by both sides. Islam does not see itself as a completely new religion, but as the final completion of a series of revelations sent to the Jews and Christians before it. Therefore, the Quran recognizes and retells the stories of most of the prophets in the Hebrew Bible. Moses. This is perhaps the most important shared figure after Abraham. For Jews, Moses is the greatest prophet, who freed their people from slavery in Egypt and received the 10 Commandments from God on Mount Sinai. For Muslims, Musa is also one of the most revered prophets, mentioned in the Quran more than any other. His confrontation with the Pharaoh is a classic lesson in perseverance and the power of faith in both traditions. David, the small shepherd who defeated the giant Goliath with a stone, later becoming the great king of Israel. Jews see him as the model of an ideal Cain. Muslims also revered Dawood as a prophet and a righteous Cain. The Psalms of David are considered one of the holy books revealed by God. Solomon, the son of David, the king famous for his unparalleled wisdom, who built the first temple in Jerusalem. In both religions, he is a symbol of wisdom and power granted by God. Jesus. This is an interesting point of both commonality and difference. For Jews, Jesus was a preacher, a Jew who lived and died as a Jew, but not the Messiah they await. For Muslims, Isa is one of the greatest prophets, miraculously born of the Virgin Mary, capable of healing the sick and raising the dead. However, Muslims do not believe he is the Son of God and do not believe he was crucified. Flipping through this album reveals one clear thing: the list of family heroes is largely identical. They share a rich spiritual heritage, a lineage of prophets that has shaped their worldview. Not only the characters, but also the foundational stories. The family legends told to children and grandchildren have astonishing similarities. If you read the book of Genesis in the Torah and the early chapters of the Quran, you will feel as if you are reading 2 versions of the same story. The creation story. Both begin with a single God creating the universe in 6 days. Adam and Eve, the story of the first man and woman. The Garden of Eden, the tempting serpent, and their eating of the forbidden fruit, which led to their expulsion from paradise. The details may differ slightly, but the main plot is the same. Noah's Ark, the story of a great flood that submerged the world and a righteous man commanded to build an ark to save his family and the animals. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the story of 2 sinful cities punished by God, and the prophet Lot trying to save the innocent. These stories are not just fairy tales, they are moral lessons, explanations of human origins and the nature of the relationship between humanity and God. And in these first chapters, Both branches of Abraham's family are reading from the same book. So, if the first pages of this family album are so similar, if they share a father, share heroes, and share the same ancient tales, then what happened on the following pages? What made two brothers, under the same roof, look at each other like strangers? It's a story about a will and an inheritance dispute that has lasted for millennia. So, if the first pages in this family album are so similar, if they share a father, share heroes, and share the same ancient tales, then what happened on the following pages? What made two brothers, under the same roof, look at each other like strangers? It's a story about a will and an inheritance dispute that has lasted for millennia. The covenant, God's last will and testament. In any family story, the father's will is always the most important document. It doesn't just divide property. It is an acknowledgement, an entrustment, a final message about who will carry on the legacy. In the story of Abraham's family, that will is called the covenant. This is not an economic contract. It is a sacred oath, an unbreakable agreement between God and Abraham and his descendants. The contents of this covenant, recorded in both the Hebrew Bible and acknowledged in the Quran, consist of three main parts. The promise of descendants. Abraham would become the father of a multitude of nations. His offspring would be as numerous as the stars in the sky, as the sand on the seashore. The promise of a special relationship. God would be their God, and they would be his people. A direct bond, without intermediaries. The promise of land. God would grant Abraham's descendants a land to live in. The promised land. This is the inheritance, a legacy not measured in money, but in identity, faith, and destiny. The problem does not lie in the contents of the will. Both sides agree on it. The problem lies in the question, who is named in the line for the rightful heir. The first line of inheritance, the lineage of Isaac. According to the Jewish Torah, the answer is very clear. The covenant was passed down through Isaac, the son of the promise, miraculously born to Abraham's official wife, Sarah. Their story is a challenging journey to protect this line of inheritance. Isaac fathered Jacob. Jacob, after a night of wrestling with an angel, was renamed Israel, meaning one who struggles with God. And from Jacob, his 12 sons became the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. This is the origin of the name, the people of Israel, or the children of Israel. For them, the covenant is a privilege, but also a burden. They were chosen, not because they were more talented or more moral than other nations, but simply because it was God's will. This chosenness comes with a great responsibility to keep God's law, which Moses later received on Mount Sinai. They believe they are the bearers of the light of monotheism to the world. And an inseparable part of this covenant is the promised land. The land of Canaan, where Abraham once lived, was promised to the descendants of Isaac and Jacob. This land, later called Israel, is not just a geographical piece of land. It is the center of their national and religious identity. To lose this land is to be exiled, to be separated from God's promise. Therefore, in the Jewish interpretation, the story flows in a clear, unbroken line. The covenant is passed down through Isaac, the son of the promise. The lineage continues through Isaac's son, Jacob, who after a fateful night wrestling with an angel is renamed Israel. And from Jacob, now called Israel, the 12 tribes are born, establishing them as the direct and sole heirs of the sacred will, the second line of inheritance, the voice of Ishmael. But in any family dispute, there is always another version of the story, and the Muslim version also has its own compelling logic. According to the Quran, Ishmael is not a secondary character. He is the firstborn son of Abraham, and also a prophet loved and blessed by God. When Hagar and Ishmael were sent into the desert, they were not abandoned. It was part of God's plan. It was there, in that desolate place, as mother and son were about to die of thirst, that an angel appeared and showed them a spring, the well of Zamzam, and around that sacred well, the city of Mecca was formed. Muslims believe that it was Abraham and Ishmael who together rebuilt the Kaaba in Mecca, the most sacred shrine of Islam, and made it the center for the worship of the one God. From this perspective, God's covenant with Abraham was not limited to the line of Isaac. It was an all-encompassing promise for both sons, and the final fulfillment of that covenant came through the greatest prophet, Muhammad, who is believed to be a descendant of Ishmael. Islam does not deny the revelations given to the Jews and Christians. Instead, they see Islam as the final, universal, and most complete message sent to all of humanity, not just to one particular people. So, in the Muslim interpretation, they are not outsiders. They are the ones who complete Abraham's mission. They are also the rightful heirs of the monotheistic legacy. The dispute is not about who is Abraham's son, but about who truly understands and correctly executes his will. Jerusalem, the indivisible family home. This abstract theological dispute might have remained forever in the pages of books if it weren't tied to a specific piece of land, a city. Jerusalem, if the covenant is the will, then Jerusalem is the Father's house, containing the most sacred heirlooms of both brothers. And the tragedy is, both believe they have absolute ownership of that house. Let's imagine it this way to make it easier to understand. You and your brother inherit the old family home. For you, the living room is the most important place. It's where your grandfather used to sit and read every evening. His armchair is still there. It's where you feel the presence of your ancestors most strongly. For your brother, the study upstairs is the sacred space. It's where your father taught him his first lessons about life. His desk is still there. It's where he feels connected to the family's legacy. Now, how can you divide that house? You can't saw the living room or the study in half. Every inch of that house is tied to a memory, an irreplaceable meaning. Jerusalem is that house. For the Jewish people, Jerusalem is the heart of the universe. It is where King David established his capital. It is where his son, King Solomon, built the first temple, believed to have housed the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence on earth. After its destruction, the second temple was rebuilt on the same hill, and after it too was destroyed by the Romans, the only remaining relic, the Western Wall, became the holiest site of prayer for Jews worldwide. Facing Jerusalem in prayer, dreaming of Jerusalem in exile, is an inseparable part of their consciousness. For Muslims, Jerusalem is the third holiest site. After Mecca and Medina, it is where the Prophet Muhammad, on a miraculous night, made his journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, and from there ascended to heaven to meet God. This event is known as the Isra and Miraj. Right on the Temple Mount, where the Jewish temples once stood, two great Islamic structures were built, the Dome of the Rock, with its iconic golden dome, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Do you see the problem now? Two of the holiest sites for two of the world's largest religions are located on top of each other, on the same hill of less than 15 hectares. This is no longer a theological dispute. It has become a real estate dispute of cosmic proportions, a dispute in which neither side can concede, because every inch of land is a piece of heritage, a part of the promise, a part of their very soul. God's will is quite complex, isn't it? It makes you wonder how stories can be interpreted. By the way, I have a question for you. In your own life, have you ever witnessed a promise or a shared memory being understood in two completely different ways by two people? Share it in the comments below. I'm very curious about these different perspectives. The word on paper, Torah and Quran. The difference lies not only in the story of inheritance, but also in the very nature of the will itself, that is, their holy scriptures. The Torah is seen by Jews as a record of the tumultuous relationship between God and the people of Israel. It was written by many different authors, over many different centuries. It contains law, history, poetry, and prophecy. It is a living book, a prolonged dialogue between a people and their God. The Quran, conversely, is believed by Muslims to be the direct, literal, and unchangeable word of God, revealed to the Prophet Muhammad through the angel Gabriel. It is not a book about God, but the word of God. For them, the Quran is the final completion, correcting what they believe was misunderstood or altered in the previous scriptures of the Jews and Christians. This fundamental difference in how they view their scriptures also contributes to the division. Jews cannot accept the Quran as the final revelation, as that would negate the eternity of their own covenant. Muslims cannot accept that the Torah is the final version, as that would negate the mission of the Prophet Muhammad. So, from the same father, two sons have followed two separate paths. Both carry a copy of the will, but they read it differently, each believing they are the one granted the true inheritance. And the tragedy is, both of those paths, eventually, intersected the same crossroads, the same hill, the same holy city. The dispute on paper had become a confrontation in real life, but the history of that confrontation was not always a straight line of hatred. There were times when these two brothers lived side by side as good neighbors. So what built the fences that separate them today? So, from the same father, two sons followed two separate paths. Both carried a copy of the will, but they read it differently, each believing they were the one granted the true inheritance. And the tragedy is, both of those paths, eventually, intersected the same crossroads, the same hill, the same holy city. The dispute on paper had become a confrontation in real life, but the history of that confrontation was not always a straight line of hatred. If we think that Jews and Muslims have always hated each other since the time of Abraham, then we are mistaken. History is much more complex, and also much more beautiful than that. There were times when these two brothers didn't just live side by side as good neighbors. They built brilliant civilizations together. The golden age in Al-Andalus, when brothers built a home together. Let's take our mind's time machine back to a place and a time where history seemed to have taken a different turn. A turn full of hope. Let's go to Al-Andalus, the land of Spain under Muslim rule, from the 8th to the 15th century. This is not a fairy tale. This is historical fact. For centuries, in cities like Córdoba, Granada, and Toledo, an incredible culture of coexistence flourished. Muslims, Jews, and Christians lived, learned, and worked together. This wasn't a mere tolerance of each other. This was a collaboration, a symbiosis. The libraries of Córdoba were filled with the manuscripts of ancient Greek philosophers, translated into Arabic by Muslim and Jewish scholars working together, and from there, translated into Latin and spread throughout Europe, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance. Jewish poets wrote beautiful verses in Arabic. Muslim and Jewish doctors studied medicine together, developing the most advanced surgical methods and pharmaceuticals of their time. One of the greatest minds of medieval Judaism, Moses Maimonides, wrote his classic works of philosophy and the law while living and working in a Muslim society. He wrote them in Arabic. This golden age is the most vivid proof that being sworn enemies is not a destiny. It shows that, when placed in an environment of tolerance and a thirst for knowledge, the two branches of Abraham's family can not only live in peace, but can create great things together. They were once good neighbors, they were once colleagues, they were once friends. So what happened? What built the fences that separate them today? The first fence, the Balfour Declaration. While World War I was raging, the British government, wanting to gain the support of the world's Jewish community, made a promise, a short letter, just over 100 words, sent from British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to a leader of the Jewish community. That letter, known as the Balfour Declaration, stated that the British government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Let's analyze that sentence for a moment. An empire, making a promise about a land they didn't fully control, to a people who mostly didn't live there, without ever consulting the people who actually did live on that land. For the Zionists, this was a great diplomatic victory, the first international recognition of their dream. For the Arabs, this was a betrayal. They felt they had been sold out by the Western powers. The fence of suspicion and resentment began to be built. The second fence, the Holocaust. If the Balfour Declaration was a political spark, the Holocaust was a moral firestorm. The genocide of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany during World War II is one of the darkest chapters in human history. It was not just a massacre, it was a systematic attempt to completely erase a people from the face of the earth. This horrific event permanently changed the consciousness of the Jewish people. It transformed the idea of a Jewish state from a political aspiration into an existential urgency. The slogan, "Never Again," echoed everywhere. They believed that if they had their own country, their own army, then a tragedy like the Holocaust could never happen again. The Holocaust gave the Zionist movement a legitimacy and strong support from the international community, which was feeling guilty and horrified by what had happened. The pressure to establish a Jewish state became greater than ever. The final fence, the establishment of the State of Israel and the war. And then, on May 14, 1948, the dream of the Jewish people came true. The State of Israel declared its independence. For Jews around the world, it was a moment of miraculous rebirth. After nearly 2,000 years of exile, persecution, and slaughter, they finally had a place to call home. It was a day of joy, of hope, of national pride. But that same day, for the Palestinian Arabs, is known by another name, Nakba, which means the catastrophe. Immediately after Israel declared independence, neighboring Arab states declared war. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War broke out. When the war ended, Israel had not only defended its independence but had also expanded its territory. The result was that more than 700,000 Palestinian Arabs had to leave their homes and villages. They became refugees, living in temporary camps in neighboring countries, or on the remaining parts of their own homeland. The shared home now had a new owner, with a new name on the sign, and the other brother now stood outside the door, holding a key that no longer fit any lock. The fences had been built, not just with maps and laws, but with opposing memories of the same event. On one side, a story of liberation and independence. On the other, a story of loss and expulsion. The conflict we see today, in essence, is not a religious holy war that has lasted since the time of Abraham. It is a modern tragedy, a dispute over land, sovereignty, and national identity, cloaked in the language of religion and fueled by the geopolitical upheavals of the 20th century. The two brothers were no longer arguing about an ancient will. Now, they were arguing about the very house they were standing in. It's heartbreaking to see how good neighbors can become strangers because of newly erected fences. It makes me wonder, have you ever had a good friendship or a beautiful relationship that was fractured by outside forces or a major misunderstanding? You don't have to share the details, just the feeling you had at that moment, if you're comfortable, and to understand why that fence is so hard to tear down. We must understand the stories that each side is telling itself, and their children, every single day. Humans don't live by facts. We live by stories. Our brain is a storytelling machine. It hates chaos. It hates randomness. It always tries to arrange every event into a story with a beginning and an end, with a protagonist, an antagonist, a cause, and an effect. And in this conflict, both sides have a very powerful, very convincing story. Two completely opposing stories, yet built from the same pain and the same aspirations. The Jewish-Israeli narrative, a story of survival. Let's try to sit down and listen to the story from Brother Isaac's side. This is a story of survival, a story told in the voice of those who have gone through millennia of exile and persecution. The story begins when the temple was destroyed by the Romans, when they were driven from their ancestral land, and had to live in exile all over the world. Everywhere they went, they were a minority, always suspected, always persecuted. They tell of the Crusades in Europe, when they were massacred in the name of God. They tell of the Spanish Inquisition, when they were forced to convert or be burned alive. They tell of the pogroms in Russia, when their villages were burned to the ground. And then, the story reaches its darkest chapter, a chapter humanity can never forget, the Holocaust, the genocide of 6 million Jews. a systematic effort to wipe them completely off the face of the earth. From the ashes of the Holocaust, an oath was born, never again. For them, the establishment of the State of Israel was not an act of invasion. It was the ultimate act of self-defense. It was a return to the homeland after 2,000 years of prayer and dreams. It was the building of a fortress, the only shelter in the world where Jews could determine their own destiny and never again have to live in fear of being slaughtered. So, when you look through the lens of this story, everything looks different. The wars with Arab nations were not wars of expansion, they were wars for survival, against enemies who wanted to throw them into the sea. Building a powerful army is not militarism, it is a life insurance policy for an entire people. Every action, no matter how harsh, is seen through the prism of survival. They feel they are standing alone, with their backs against the wall, and there is no retreat. It is a tragic epic, a story of resilience and the will to live. The Muslim-Palestinian narrative, a story of loss. Now, let's go to the next room and listen to the story from Brother Ishmael's side. This is a story of loss and injustice, a story told in the voice of those who had lived on this land for generations, and then one day, suddenly became strangers in their own homeland. Their story begins with a land, Palestine, where Muslims, Christians, and a small Jewish community had lived together in relative peace under the Ottomans. Then they tell of the betrayal by the Western powers, of the Balfour Declaration, when Britain promised a land that did not belong to them, to another people, without ever consulting them. They tell of the wave of Jewish immigrants from Europe, bringing with them ideas and resources they could not compete with. And then, their story also has its darkest chapter, a word that, when mentioned, carries the weight of an entire people, Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948. For them, it was not a war of independence, it was an ethnic cleansing. They tell of villages razed to the ground, of families having to leave their homes, their olive groves, carrying only the key to their house with the hope of one day returning, a hope that has lasted for over 70 years. They tell of the life of refugees, of occupation, of separation walls, of the loss of dignity and the right to self-determination. So, when you look through the lens of this story, everything also looks completely different. The uprisings are not acts of terrorism, they are the resistance of an oppressed people. The stones that are thrown are not weapons, they are symbols of desperation. Every action, even the most violent, is seen through the prism of reclaiming justice and dignity that was stolen. They feel they are the victims of a historical conspiracy, abandoned by the entire world. It is a sorrowful story, a story of injustice and the longing to return home. The psychology of division. When the story becomes a prison, two stories, both are real, both are built from real pain, and the problem is, once we have chosen a story, our brain will do everything to protect it. This is when psychological mechanisms kick in, turning physical fences into mental prisons. Confirmation bias. This is our tendency to search for, interpret, and recall information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. An Israeli will tend to read news about Palestinian attacks and ignore news about the difficult living conditions in the West Bank. A Palestinian will do the opposite. Neither is intentionally lying, their brains are just automatically filtering information to protect the story they believe to be true. Echo chamber. And then, modern technology pours fuel on the fire. Social media algorithms, news channels, are all designed to show us what we want to see. A Jew in Tel Aviv and a Muslim in Ramallah, though both scrolling through Facebook, or living in two completely different information universes, they only hear the echo of their own community. the voice of the other side is distorted, seen as propaganda, lies, or simply never appears at all. Dehumanization, when you never truly hear the other side's story, never see them as a human being with the same pain and hopes as you. You begin to dehumanize them. They are no longer a father who lost a child, but a terrorist. They are no longer a frightened soldier, but an occupier. Dehumanization makes violence more palatable. It's like when you and your brother fight over the TV remote. You run to your mom, saying your brother bullied you. Your brother runs to your dad, saying you started it. Both of you tell a version of the story where you are the victim. And then your parents, instead of making you two talk to each other, start arguing themselves. Mom completely believes your story. Dad completely believes your brother's story. They both start bringing up each other's past mistakes. That's how an argument over the TV remote turns into a family crisis. And that's how this conflict, aided by outside powers and the media, has turned a dispute between two peoples into a problem with no exit. Each side is trapped in its own narrative, a story that is retold every day in schools, in synagogues, in mosques, on the evening news, a story that has become a part of who they are. The stories we tell ourselves are powerful. Sometimes they become our own prisons. This makes me wonder, have you ever realized that a story you always believed to be true, about a person or an event, was actually only half of the picture? What was that aha moment like for you? Share your story below. So, if each side is trapped in a narrative prison of its own making, is there any way out? Can someone find a third story, one that can encompass both? Perhaps the key isn't in writing a new story, but in having the courage to listen to the other's story. So, each side is trapped in a narrative prison of its own making, a story that is retold every day in schools, in synagogues, in mosques, on the evening news, a story that has become a part of who they are. Is there any way out? Can someone find a third story, one that can encompass both? It's easy to say, just listen to each other, but how can you listen when the guns are still firing, when fear still looms, and when the story of the enemy has been carved into your mind since you were a child? Perhaps the key isn't in writing a brand new story. It lies in having the courage to listen to the other's story. And to do that, sometimes, we have to look for the small cracks in the dividing wall. Beyond politics, flickers of light in the darkness, amidst the news headlines of bombs and hatred, quieter stories are unfolding, stories of ordinary people who have decided they no longer want to be part of the war. They want to be part of the solution. Think of the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, founded by the Jewish conductor Daniel Barenboim and the Palestinian literary scholar Edward Said. This orchestra brings together young musicians from Israel, Palestine, and other Arab nations. On stage, they are not enemies, they are colleagues, creating a symphony together. They play the music of Beethoven, of Mozart, and in those moments, the only language that exists is the language of music, a language with no borders. Think of villages like Neve Shalom, Wahat al-Salam, which means oasis of peace. This is a community founded by Jewish and Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel, who have chosen to live together, to build a school together where their children learn both languages, Hebrew and Arabic, and learn about history from both perspectives. And perhaps most movingly, there are organizations like the Parents' Circle, Families Forum. This is a place where fathers and mothers who have lost children from both sides of the conflict sit together. An Israeli mother whose son was killed in a bombing, a Palestinian father whose daughter was shot and killed by a soldier. They sit together, not to argue about who is right or wrong. They don't talk about politics. They talk about the names of their lost children. They show each other photos of their children, and they realize one fundamental thing: their pain is identical. The pain of losing the child has no nationality, no religion. These flickers of light are small. They cannot change the political landscape overnight, but they prove one thing: coexistence is not a utopian dream. It is happening every day, in places where courage is greater than hatred. The power of listening when the enemy has a name. And in those encounters, a small miracle happens, a profound psychological shift, when you truly sit down, face to face, and listen to the story of the person you were taught is the enemy. Something strange happens. You no longer see an Israeli or a Palestinian. You see another mother who is also crying for her child. You see another father who is also worried about his family's future. You see a human being with the same hopes, fears, and scars as you. The enemy is an abstract concept. It's a label, a dangerous generalization, but a personal story is not. A story about a specific morning, a specific house, a specific child, has the power to break down all prejudice. When the enemy has a name, a face, a story, they are no longer the enemy. They become a person, and that is when empathy can begin to grow. Redefining sworn enemies. So, perhaps the problem isn't that they cannot live under the same sky. The problem is that they cannot live together when both believe they are the sole owner of that sky. Being sworn enemies is not a natural state. It is a choice that is reinforced every day. It is reinforced when people only listen to news from one side. It is reinforced when politicians use hatred to win votes. It is reinforced when people teach their children the story of fear instead of the story of hope. But if it is a choice, then that also means there can be another choice. The final lesson: stop using history as a weapon. Our journey tonight has taken us through thousands of years of history, through holy scriptures, maps, and stories, and perhaps the final lesson it offers us is this: the solution to this conflict does not lie in deciding who was right and who was wrong in the past. Trying to adjudicate a 4,000-year-old dispute is a futile exercise. It will only lead to endless arguments. The solution lies in acknowledging each other's humanity in the present. It does not require the Jewish people to abandon their story of survival, nor does it require the Palestinian people to forget their story of loss. It requires both sides to have the courage to listen to the other's story, and to acknowledge that their pain is also a real pain. It does not require forgetting history, but it does require us to stop using history as a weapon to attack others, and to start using it as a mirror to look at ourselves. Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of humanity's oldest sorrows. We began with a tense family dinner, and we end with the hope of a shared table. The story of Judaism and Islam, in the end, is not the story of two strange religions. It is the tragedy of a family that has forgotten they share a common father, who taught them about faith and sacrifice. A father who, if he could see his descendants today, would probably not ask, who is right, who is wrong, but perhaps he would just ask a simple question: why don't you talk to each other? Before we part, I have one last question for you. In your own life, is there a relationship where you have focused only on the differences and forgotten the common ground? Please share your thoughts in our late night cafe below. And don't forget to tell me, where are you listening to this from, and what time is it? I will read them all, as always, and if you feel we're on the same frequency, if you want more companions on these long, thoughtful nights, you know what to do. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so we don't miss each other on the next strange journey at 2 a.m. Now, take a deep breath, Be grateful for the imperfect but still mendable relationships in your life. And I wish you a peaceful sleep. Before we began, I asked myself, what would they need at the very end? Not answers, not applause, but a moment to let go. So I found a melody, one that knows how to wait, how to breathe, how to dissolve softly into sleep. It's here for you now. Let it hold the rest of your night. you're still here, then you're something rare. Not many stay this long. So, thank you for choosing to stay. I'm here too, still awake, surrounded by the quiet glow of my editing screen, shaping the next stories just for you. If there's anything you want to leave behind, a whisper, a suggestion, even just a symbol, drop it in the comments. Because maybe, tomorrow night, you'll hear yourself echoed in a story that's never been told before. still here, even now? I have a feeling part of you is still wandering somewhere between wakefulness and dreaming. I know that feeling well because I'm still awake with you. In a quiet room, I'm gently laying out layers of sound, each breath, each beat, preparing the next journey we'll take together. If you're still listening, leave me a sign. Let me know how you're feeling or just where you are in this vast world. Because right now, in this stillness, you are not alone. You're still there, aren't you? I can't see you, but I can feel you. Like a soft signal pulsing across the silence. Over here, I'm still working, refining layers of sound, rewriting fragments of voice, building the landscape for our next adventure. One that you might inspire. If an idea comes to you, share it with me. Comment below, a theme, a memory, a strange dream. I read every word, because I never tell these stories alone. I tell them with you.